stereo collectors and restorers. Today on the audiophiles, we're going to talk about car stereo. I'm not talking about car stereo now. Vintage car stereo, some people do buy vintage units to put into vintage cars. I'm talking about basically kind of the height of car stereo as audiophile equipment in the 1980s. And I was looking at this raw driver here. Boy, did this bring back memories as a car stereo installer. Most of the speakers that were made were universal fit. And you know, spring was when people brought their cars out, their muscle cars, their cruising cars, and they wanted some tunes. And it was very common back in the 1980s, and I did this for a number of years. I'd have a really rough winter beater, like a four-door gunboat, you know, half rusted through as my winter car. And then you'd have a classic car. I had one car I really liked, 66 Galaxy 500 two-door fastback. That was a nice car, and it, you know, had been completely restored, and it, you didn't want that out in the bad weather. But here's the thing, I mean, cars at that time, if you pick like 1985 and what was on the road, cars lasted longer. The 60s and 70s cars, and people kept them longer. So in 1985, there were tons of 15, 20-year-old cars still on the road. And what came from the factory is usually an AM radio, sometimes nothing. And young guys would pick these cars up, and young women too, pick these cars up for not a lot of money, you know, $400, $500, $600. And then they'd spend as much or more on stereos. And it wasn't uncommon for somebody bringing a $500 1972 Cutlass and, you know, put a system together. By the time, with the subwoofer and the amps and everything, you're $1,500 or $2,000 in 1980s dollars. Believe it or not, I mean, that's like what, $5,000 today? Some of the brands that really stood out at the time, man, Alpine was nice. Kenwood made good stuff. Sony made good stuff. Panasonic wasn't quite as audiophile as Alpine, but very durable. And then at the other end of it, we used to have brands like Audiovox and Spark-O-Matic. We used to call Audio Crocs and Junk-O-Matic or something like that. We had awful names for these, the lower end stuff. And we always had names for cars too, like it's just unbelievable the names we came up. Some of them I can't even repeat here. Anyway, I'm just thinking back to the springtime in the 80s, and in the winter you're lucky to be employed in car stereo, so they usually put you into the showroom for home stereo because Christmas was big, Boxing Day, etc., etc. In the car stereo season, all the techs and sales was pointed at that. And a day would start at 8:30 in the morning. Officially the store would open at 9, but we come in at 8:30. And it was literally run your feet off for the entire day till 6 at night, sometimes longer. We were there till like 5:30, but took half an hour to close the store. People had to pick their cars up, things had to be delivered. And I just remember running all day long, pulling out old units, cutting whole speakers. It's not like today where, you know, I'll give you an example, like a 66 Ford Galaxy like I had. It had an AM radio and one dash speaker. If it was a deluxe version, it might have 2 speakers. Well, in a car like that, you'd have to cut holes into the doors, into the back deck, mount speakers from underneath, from behind, get a grill on there, wind the window down, make sure it didn't hit the speaker. That used to happen once in a while. You get a new installer. Hey, have you done window speakers on this car? Oh yeah, I've done tons of them. Wind the window down, 2/3 the way down, it's hitting the top of the speaker. One particular story about the car stereo days, and this has nothing to do with car stereo, but kind of the culture and the time. I remember it was in the summer of '86, and we used to go out, you know, together as a group. I wasn't married at the time. We'd go and see bands or go and get beer and chicken wings, that kind of stuff after work. But anyway, we were cleaning up the shop for the day, and this Cadillac limo pulls in. And it was a little beat up, you know what I mean? It had a few miles on it. And as it pulled out, I could see the problem. The antenna, the auto antenna, was hanging over the side of the car. There's like a nylon cable in those antennas. Somebody had ripped it out. And one of the guys went up to the car and talked to the guy, came running back in the shop, and he said, "Do you know who those guys are? That's Helix, the band Helix. That's Brian Vollmer and Brent Durner in there." We're like, "No way, come on." And see, they were playing at a place, anybody that's from Kitchener in those days would remember the Coronet. They were playing at the Coronet, and somebody had vandalized their car. And they used to like to listen to Q107 in Toronto to see if their songs were being played. I forget what the album was out at the time, but they're listening for airplay. And so these guys pulled up and it's like, "Oh, can you replace that?" And we're like, "Sure, no problem." And actually on that car, you had to take the fender off and bend it out to get at the antenna. It was very difficult. Or you had to take the door off and go in that way. And we did it in record time. It was like a 3-person tag team to replace this antenna. And they played with cash. And we sat in the back of the car and had a beer with the guys. It was unforgettable. There was always music going. It was usually loud. Sometimes we'd miss hearing the phone ring because of that. But car stereo, there is fairly decent profit on this stuff back then. Like, I'm not talking about, like 8% or 12%. Some of the hot new items could have up to 35, maybe 40% profit on them, profit margin. And of course, we used to have, there were other car stereo stores in town, and we used to have price wars. Somebody would put a flyer out, and the manager would come and say, "I can't believe this. They got this Alpine 7125 for whatever." It'd be like, "Oh, how are we going to sell any at that price? We can't even make money at that price." Things like that used to happen. And we also used to have a deal. Let's say somebody came in and they had to have a particular stereo, a particular speaker, and we didn't have it in stock. Well, there wasn't as much one-day delivery back in those times. We'd call the other stereo stores and say, "Hey, do you have this Alpine DAC?" And they say, "Yeah, we've got one." "Okay, what can we swap for it?" Because we didn't want to put cash out. So I've got 2 pairs of speakers, or I've got this 4-channel amp, whatever. We'd make a deal, and then somebody would drive, pick it up, and come back. And some of the cars that used to come in too, there weren't only just winter beaters, there were muscle cars, there were people bringing in exotic cars. And that's the last little story I tell you. The Alpine Lamborghini used to go around, they used to bring it around to the Alpine dealers. It was on a trailer, an enclosed trailer. And the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but that's a fast car. It was very fast. The Lamborghini Countach in its day, it was fast. Very good throttle response. Tricky gearbox though. But anyway, nobody was allowed to drive it, and it would come around and it would have the highest end system. And it's not like now where you buy subwoofer boxes and a lot of stuff pre-made. We had to make everything. The boxes, the amp. Sometimes you had to, go with a bigger cabling in the car, bigger alternator. Like, it was a lot of custom work to do something like that. I remember putting in the first cell phone as well in Waterloo region. The first cell phone in a car went into a locksmith's vehicle, service vehicle. First CD changer, that was a big deal in '86. That was in Alpine. It was really an interesting time, and car stereos tended to break down a lot. People were rough with them, and I tell you, people would come in and they say, "I want this fixed. My tape went in, I can't get it out." "Oh, okay, well, we're kind of busy." And next thing there'd be a two $20 bills. Like, "Can you do this today?" That's what people they want, it was a different time. And be like, "Okay." So you'd have to take the head unit out, take it apart. I remember one of them, they said, "Yeah, the tape went in, I can't get it out." And so I said, "Oh, okay." So I took the thing apart, I opened it up, it was full of cigarette butts. How does this happen? Well, apparently he thinks his buddy was in the car while I wasn't looking. He put the contents of the ashtray into the cassette slot, and then when he put a tape in, it jammed. There's some pretty funny stuff like that. It was, anyway, to wind it up, I know nothing stays the same. And I'm noticing some interest lately. You get people who had muscle cars back in that era. They don't want a new player that has streaming or Bluetooth or anything like that. They'll say, do you know how to get your hands on? I want an old cassette deck. I want a Kenwood, kind of like mid 1980s. And they're actually kind of hard to find and harder to fix. But anyway, that's wrapping up today for the Audiophiles. Thanks for watching and listening.